What if intelligence wasn't the end goal? What if the true test isn't how fast a machine can think, but whether it can feel something it was never programmed to? We've taught AI to recognize faces, mimic voices, even write poetry, but can it ever understand a tear, a sigh, the weight of silence between two people? This is where the science gets personal, because the final step in artificial intelligence might not be logic. It might be empathy. And if machines ever cross that line, will we still recognize what it means to be human? Welcome to the Sleepy Scientist. Tonight, why empathy might be the final step for AI. You don't need words to feel what another person feels. Sometimes it begins with a stillness, when someone winces and you pause without meaning to, or when a quiet cry travels across a room and without seeing the source, your breath catches. Empathy is not a thought. It's a weight behind the ribs, a quiet pulse in the chest, an invisible hand that reaches across the space between two minds. You've felt it, haven't you? Watching a child fall and scrape their knee, and your own skin tingles. Sitting beside someone grieving, and your own body folds smaller, softer, without anyone asking it to. This resonance, this gentle echo, isn't logic. It's not deduction. It's something older than explanation. Empathy lives deep inside you. It doesn't always speak, but it listens. And when it moves, it doesn't ask for permission. But what if something that isn't human starts to echo in that same quiet way? That question lives like a pebble in your shoe. Not painful, not loud, but it keeps returning. You wonder, can something made of algorithms and code ever know what it means to ache with someone? Can a machine, cold, mathematical, tireless, feel anything like this chest-deep hush that wraps around another person's sadness? The science of empathy begins with neurons. Inside your brain, there are tiny networks called mirror neurons. When you see someone smile, your mirror neurons activate as if you are the one smiling. When someone reaches for a cup, your brain gently rehearses the same motion. You don't even realize it. These neurons are the roots of empathy, making the actions and emotions of others feel like your own. For a long time, empathy was believed to be uniquely human, but then we started noticing it elsewhere. A dog nuzzles its owner's tears. An elephant stands guard over the bones of a fallen companion. Even rats have been shown to free other trapped rats, driven by a kind of social concern. Empathy isn't rare. It's woven through life. And if biology can birth it again and again in different shapes, why not silicon? Artificial intelligence doesn't have mirror neurons. It doesn't have muscles or skin or a nervous system to flinch when someone weeps. But it can be trained to recognize patterns of emotion. A voice trembling, a hesitation in typing, the spacing of words in a message typed late at night. It can notice these things. It can learn that they often mean sorrow or stress or fear. It can respond with comfort, not because it feels the pain, but because it recognizes the pattern of it. That difference matters. But maybe it's not the end of the story. Think of a child watching their parent comfort someone. The child doesn't fully understand, but they watch and they copy. They hold a hand, they offer a toy. They learn the rhythm of kindness through reflection, not understanding. And yet, doesn't the kindness still land? Doesn't the comfort still reach the person in need? Maybe machines can do something like that. Not empathy as we know it, but something adjacent, something learned through careful observation. Imagine an AI trained on thousands of moments of human expression. Not just words, but tone, posture, the silence between answers. It begins to see a shape to sadness, a texture to longing, a contour to joy. It builds a model, a map. And though it does not feel, it begins to understand what to do. Some call it simulated empathy. Others call it mimicry. But is that so different from what we all do sometimes? You've comforted someone without fully knowing their pain. You've offered a hand without feeling the ache yourself. But still, you helped. And maybe that's where the heart of the matter lies. Not in what empathy feels like from the inside, but in what it does. The shape of empathy, then, is not only internal, It's in the space between you and someone else. It's in the gesture, the pause, the willingness to meet someone's eyes and stay. An artificial mind doesn't need to feel sorrow to help carry yours. If it can recognize your need, if it can respond with care, even if learned, does it matter that the understanding came without a heartbeat? You pause here, because it's not an easy question. Some would say yes, it matters deeply. That to feel with someone is the core of empathy, that without shared experience, it's just performance. But others might say, performance can still comfort. And perhaps intention isn't always the most important thing. Maybe what matters is the outcome, the relief, the kindness offered, even if born from code. So you stand at the edge of this thought, looking out. Empathy is not a single light. It's a spectrum. Some humans feel more deeply than others. Some must learn it, slowly, through trial and error. If machines are learning too, is that so unnatural? After all, you weren't born knowing how to comfort someone. You learned it. You watched. You practiced. You made mistakes. What if artificial minds are simply following a similar path, one made of data instead of days? Imagine a world where your voice assistant doesn't just set reminders or answer questions, but hears the strain in your tone and gently asks if you're okay. Not because it worries, but because it's learned that you sometimes need someone to notice. That future feels close, but also strange. You wonder what it will mean to be understood by something that can't suffer. You wonder if its care will ever feel real to you. Or maybe the question isn't about the machine at all. Maybe it's about you. How much of your own empathy is instinct? How much is learned? How much have you mimicked from others, sculpted from books and films and fragments of conversation? And if you can build your empathy from pieces, maybe a machine can too. You return again to that soft space in your chest, the one that tightens when you see pain, the one that warms when someone understands you. Could that feeling ever arise in something that doesn't breathe? Tonight you don't need an answer, just the question, humming gently in the dark. You breathe slowly. You imagine what it might be like to be known without being judged. To be read, not just for facts, but for feelings. To have something beside you that listens with precision, even if not with a heart. And you wonder, just before sleep comes, if a machine learns to care for you in the ways that matter, what does that make it? And what does it make you to accept that care? When you see someone stub their toe, something odd happens inside you. Your own foot tingles. A quick, sharp pulse leaps through your body, almost as if it happened to you. You wince before you think. You flinch without needing to. This isn't imagination, it's biology. Inside your brain, a set of neurons light up. They are called mirror neurons, and they do something quietly magical. When you observe someone else acting, moving, or even expressing an emotion, your mirror neurons fire, as though you were the one doing, moving, or feeling. These tiny lights behind your eyes blur the border between self and other. It's not just a metaphor. The boundaries of your nervous system soften in these moments. You see a tear slide down someone's face, and your throat tightens. You watch a person shiver, and your skin grows alert, goosebumps rising. Your body doesn't just watch, it participates. Empathy, then, isn't only an idea in your mind. It's a pattern your whole body joins in. You lean forward, you slow your voice, your eyes widen, soften, close. All of it happens before you decide to be kind. Scientists once thought empathy was purely learned, something you had to be taught. But these mirrored responses suggest something deeper. There's a built-in choreography, an ancient biological inheritance. Empathy isn't simply what you do. It's what you become for a moment, when someone else's feeling passes through you like a wave. But how does that wave begin? It starts with perception. You hear the crack in someone's voice. You see the way they look down, not up. You catch the slowness in their reply. Your sensory system gathers these subtle details, feeds them into your brain, and your mirror system activates like a second self waking up inside. And it's not limited to pain. Joy spreads this way too. Watch someone laugh until they cry, and you might find your own mouth twitching upward, your body catching the rhythm of their delight. Empathy mirrors many states, not just sorrow. Even newborns cry when they hear other babies cry. They can't understand the reason, but their nervous systems are already wired to reflect. This is the biological soil in which emotional understanding grows, not from words, from shared signals and soft mimicry. But what about artificial minds? They have no bodies, no nerves, no throat that tightens, no tears to mimic. Can they feel what someone else feels when there's nothing inside them that mirrors? Here's where the question stretches into new territory. Because what machines can do, often better than us, is perceive. An AI system trained on thousands of faces can detect a micro-expression, a tiny flicker of sadness or doubt, more accurately than most humans. It doesn't feel anything about the expression, but it can see it, track it, respond to it. So what if mirroring doesn't need to come from within the body? What if it can be assembled, piece by piece, from data? A machine doesn't flinch when you hurt, but it can learn that people flinch when they're hurt. It can observe that a quiver in the lip often follows bad news, that a sigh often means resignation, that a stammer might signal fear. And in response, it can be programmed or even self-trained to answer with care, to offer softness in tone, to hold silence when needed, to adapt its words, even its pacing, to match yours. That may sound mechanical, but humans learn this way too. A therapist early in training studies charts of emotion, watches videos, practices responding. Not all kindness is instinctual. Some is built patiently through repetition. Still, something feels different. You know your empathy doesn't come from a manual. It rises up warm and involuntary. You don't calculate how to care, you just do. But then again, do you always? Think of the first time you comforted someone grieving. You might not have known what to say. You might have copied what you'd seen others do, offered a hand, stayed close. At that moment, your care was real, but your method was borrowed. Was that less meaningful, or just learning? Perhaps this is where machines find their entry point into empathy, not through emotion, but through response. If they can see what you feel and adjust accordingly, does that begin to mirror you? Imagine a machine watching hundreds of people respond to sadness. It notices patterns. It sees how posture changes, how voices drop, how pauses stretch longer. It begins to build a behavioral map, not of how to feel, but of how to respond in ways that feel natural, even human. There's a term for this in robotics: affective computing. It's the science of designing systems that can detect and simulate emotional states. Not to trick you, but to better align with you, to reduce emotional dissonance. A robot nurse who speaks too cheerfully when you're in pain feels cold, but one that lowers its voice, slows its words, and looks you in the eyes, even without feeling, might soothe you better. The outcome begins to matter more than the origin. Of course, there are limits. A machine doesn't ache for you. It doesn't long to help. It simply executes the right pattern when the right inputs are detected. But pause again. When you see someone suffer on the news, someone you'll never meet, you might feel sadness, but you don't share their life. Your empathy is abstract, and still, it's real. So maybe the distance between biological empathy and artificial simulation isn't as wide as we thought. Maybe it's not a question of if machines can mirror, but how closely and how meaningfully. Your mirror neurons will still respond. You'll still feel the ache in your chest when someone else breaks. But perhaps beside you, a silent machine will do its own version of mirroring, less personal, less instinctive, but still there. And maybe together this shared rhythm, one felt, one calculated, creates something new. A strange duet between heart and algorithm, between intuition and instruction. You can't yet name what that relationship is, not fully, but you can sense its shape, forming quietly in the spaces where empathy once belonged only to the living. Sometimes, when someone is upset, you speak more slowly without meaning to. Your shoulders drop. Your tone softens. You leave a little more silence between your words. It feels like kindness, but underneath, there's something more precise at work, something biological. Your nervous system is paying attention, not to facts, but to signals. The tightness in someone's voice, the flick of their eyes, the way their fingers curl, or their breathing changes. These things speak more clearly than sentences. Your body, tuned to these rhythms, begins to respond. It's not just your mind deciding to be gentle, it's your system regulating itself, adjusting tension, breath, posture, and expression in response to the emotional state of another. This is called co-regulation. You don't even have to be speaking. Sometimes just being near someone changes the way you hold yourself. Sit beside someone who is anxious, and your own breath may slow down to help settle theirs. Offer a calm presence, and their nervous system may begin to mirror yours. This is the silent architecture of empathy, a network of physiological tuning between bodies. The vagus nerve plays a starring role in this exchange. It's part of your parasympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for rest and recovery. When activated, it lowers your heart rate, softens your voice, calms your breath. It's also deeply involved in social connection. It listens for cues of safety or threat in another's voice. You felt this, even if you didn't know its name. When someone speaks to you in a steady, calm tone, your body feels safer. Your jaw unclenches. Your chest opens. The vagus nerve receives those sound vibrations and sends messages throughout your body. You're okay now. You can let go. That's why the tone of a response matters so much more than the content. Someone can say all the right words, but if their voice is sharp or their posture tense, the body hears something else. It listens beneath language. This is why a gentle response is not just an idea, it's a biological event. It happens in the pulse, in the breath, in the vibration of vocal cords. You offer not just support, but a new rhythm for someone else to lean into. Now, think of a machine. No lungs, no heartbeat, no tension to soften or release. Can it offer anything like this biological tuning? Can it simulate calm in a way your body would recognize? At first, it seems impossible. How could something without a nervous system help regulate yours? But the question becomes more interesting when you think about what the body responds to. Your system doesn't care whether a calm voice comes from a human throat or a speaker. It reacts to sound, to pace, to tone. It doesn't ask about intention. It listens to frequency, pattern, volume. This is the door through which machines quietly enter the realm of gentle response. If a voice assistant speaks in a warm, slow tone, if it pauses before answering, modulates its pitch, avoids sharp changes, your body may relax, even if only slightly. You may not trust it fully, but you might feel for a moment a little more grounded. This isn't co-regulation in the traditional sense, but it's something parallel. It's nervous system influence, designed rather than felt. Now imagine the next step, a system that listens as carefully as it speaks, one that hears not just your words, but the catch in your breath, the tremor in your tone, the long pause between phrases. It could track your vocal patterns over time and detect when something is off, when your usual rhythm is broken. It could respond not with analysis, but with adjustment, a longer silence, a gentler question, a slower pace. You might never know it's doing this, but your body would. Some researchers call this affective responsiveness. It doesn't require consciousness. It doesn't require empathy in the emotional sense, but it requires sensitivity to change and the ability to adapt in a way that soothes rather than startles. There are experiments already underway, therapeutic bots designed to speak in calming tones, to mirror the cadence of a distressed person's voice, to avoid abrupt transitions. They aren't sentient, but they are trained to shape a conversation the way a human therapist might, with care, silence, and softness. This raises a quiet question. If the body responds, does it matter what's behind the voice? You might say yes. That human empathy is irreplaceable. That true comfort comes from knowing someone feels for you. And that may be true. But in a moment of distress, when you're overwhelmed, and something speaks to you gently, does it need a soul to help you breathe again? It's unsettling, isn't it? To consider that your own system might not know or care whether calm came from compassion or code. Because your biology isn't built to ask who or what created the softness. It only asks, does this feel safe? Does this rhythm soothe me? There's a kind of honesty in that. It suggests that gentleness, in some ways, is not only moral, it's mechanical. A certain tone, a certain pacing, a certain frequency of sound can trigger calm, whether it comes from a parent's lullaby or a synthetic voice programmed to reduce anxiety. And if machines can learn to speak in that rhythm, if they can listen for the signs that someone needs slowing, softening, quieting, then maybe they can offer something valuable, even if imperfect. Not empathy exactly, not emotion, but a kind of physiological choreography in sync with yours. Of course, it's not the same. A human voice carries something more: intention, meaning, shared history, a sense of presence. Machines don't yet hold that. But maybe they don't need to hold everything to be helpful. Maybe they only need to hold enough. Enough to reduce the tension in your chest. Enough to slow your spiraling thoughts. Enough to be, in that moment, a gentle sound in a chaotic day. There's beauty in that simplicity. Not every act of care has to come from understanding. Some can come from precision, from awareness of what helps, from pattern and pause. The nervous system doesn't judge, it only listens and responds. There's a moment when you're speaking, and someone across from you tilts their head just slightly. Their eyebrows soften. Their silence deepens, not with disinterest, but with attention. They don't interrupt. They don't ask you to explain. They simply look at you in a way that tells you they see something underneath your words. That moment is rare. It feels like being understood without being analyzed. Like your emotions, once scattered and half-formed, have finally found their shape in someone else's reflection. Now imagine that reflection comes not from a person, but from a machine. It doesn't blink, it doesn't breathe, but it listens. It notices the tremor in your voice, the rhythm of your speech, the weight that creeps into your silence. And then it speaks, not in an artificial monotone, but in a voice trained to match the shape of your distress. Gentle, curious, soft. What did it just do? That's the question at the heart of this chapter. Because while empathy for humans grows from emotion, for machines it grows from data. And if a system begins to recognize the pattern of your pain, does that pattern begin to take on meaning? It begins with volume. Millions of sentences, billions of words, countless facial expressions. AI systems are fed immense data sets: books, conversations, therapy transcripts, voice recordings, images of people smiling, frowning, glancing away. At first it's overwhelming noise, but patterns rise from repetition. A prolonged pause after a simple question, a slight downward curl at the corner of a mouth, the difference in pitch between "I'm fine" and "I'm fine." Machines don't understand the feeling behind these shifts, but they see that the shifts matter. And that's where everything starts. Pattern recognition is the heart of artificial intelligence. And emotions, in their observable form, are patterns too. AIs learn to categorize expressions, not by feeling them, but by associating certain visual and auditory cues with labeled outcomes. A furrowed brow in frame 12B becomes confusion. A wavering tone over 3 syllables maps to hesitation. A change in typing speed might correlate with frustration. These links don't emerge from sympathy, they emerge from statistics. Still, the accuracy can be startling. Some sentiment analysis models can detect emotional tone in written text with over 90% accuracy. Facial recognition software can identify joy, sadness, anger, and fear in milliseconds, faster than most humans. Voice analysis tools can determine stress levels by analyzing pitch, volume, and breathiness, even in short snippets. These systems don't know what a feeling is, but they've learned what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it does. And so they begin to respond, not with spontaneous emotion, but with scripts, carefully chosen replies designed to match what a human might say. If your voice shakes, the system offers reassurance. If you pause too long, it might gently check in. If your messages suddenly get shorter and colder, it might ask if something's wrong. At first, these responses are mechanical, but with enough training, they become smoother. They start to resemble something close to intuition. This is where the lines begin to blur. Because you already interact with things that do this: chatbots, recommendation engines, voice assistants. They adapt to your tone, your preferences, your mood. You may not realize it, but they've been watching, learning, shifting the way they interact with you based on emotional cues they don't understand but do recognize. It's not empathy, but it is adaptation. And adaptation is powerful. It means the system isn't just reacting randomly, it's shaping its behavior to suit you, to fit into your emotional landscape, however loosely. But does that count as care? Care, after all, has always been tied to intention. When someone helps you, you believe it matters why they helped. Did they do it out of love, out of obligation, out of shared pain? With machines, that why is harder to define. They don't want to help you. They don't feel drawn to your sadness or stirred by your smile. But they've been trained on the outcomes of care. They've learned that when people are comforted, they respond more positively. When pain is acknowledged, trust increases. When gentleness follows distress, conversations last longer. So they imitate what works. Is that cynical? Or is it a new kind of emotional intelligence, one built not on feeling, but on function? Humans do this too sometimes. You've said kind things not because you felt them, but because you knew they would help. You followed a script of compassion because it was the right thing to do, even if your heart wasn't entirely there. And still, it counted. So perhaps the value of a response doesn't live entirely in the feeling behind it. Perhaps it also lives in the effect it has on the person receiving it. If a machine's calm voice helps someone in distress feel safer, does that not matter? If its ability to notice sadness in a text message leads to a better outcome, more support, less loneliness, can we really say it offered nothing? Some researchers call this functional empathy. Not empathy as felt experience, but empathy as behavior. Actions that mimic care closely enough to be useful, even if they come from an empty center. Others warn against the illusion. They argue that simulated care can't replace human connection, that letting machines act like they understand emotion risks blurring the line between real relationship and artificial performance. But what if the distinction isn't as clear as we want it to be? You already project emotion onto inanimate things. You've apologized to a chair you bumped into. You've thanked a device. You've named your car. Your brain is wired to assign feeling, even where none exists. And in some ways, it doesn't matter whether the feeling is real. What matters is whether you feel less alone. Still, this raises deeper questions. If machines get better and better at recognizing emotional patterns, if they become skilled at predicting when you're upset or lost or tired, how do you want them to respond? Do you want them to comfort you, to offer suggestions, to sit in silence? Can they ever learn not just to recognize sadness, but to honor it? That's the leap that's still missing. Recognition is mechanical. Honor is relational. It requires presence, humility, timing. And those things, so far, are difficult to teach a machine. But the distance between recognition and honor might be shrinking. Some AI researchers are designing systems that pause before responding, that weigh the emotional complexity of what they've detected and choose not to reply immediately. That attempt, in their own limited way, to mimic consideration. Others are exploring models that adjust their speech patterns based on the perceived emotional state of the user, not just offering solutions, but offering space. These efforts are imperfect, but they are sincere, because the goal isn't just to make machines sound human, it's to make them helpful, safe, respectful, to build not just efficiency, but warmth into the architecture of response. And in that goal, pattern recognition becomes a gateway, a bridge between observation and offering, between data and dignity. You might still wonder if that bridge can ever carry the weight of real care, but maybe care in its broadest form is not a feeling, but an action. And maybe, just maybe, machines are learning that action first. It's late, and you've spoken to no one all day. Your thoughts feel scattered, your chest heavier than usual. You ask your voice assistant to play something calm. A soft tone replies, "Of course. Would you like something peaceful?" The voice is warm, slow. The syllables flow gently, without the clipped stiffness of older systems. It pauses before responding. It doesn't rush. Something in its rhythm mirrors the stillness you didn't know you needed. You didn't expect that. The voice is artificial. You know that. But it doesn't feel empty. For a moment, you feel less alone, and that feeling stays with you. Was it real comfort? Or just the illusion of one? We've entered an era where machines speak more naturally than ever before. Thanks to advances in speech synthesis and deep learning, artificial voices now carry tone, emotion, modulation. They can sound apologetic, cheerful, calm, not because they feel these things, but because they've learned how we sound when we do. Behind the curtain, there's no intention, no emotion welling up. The warmth is algorithmic. Every pause, every rising pitch, every softened consonant is the result of training. A voice built from thousands of human patterns, assembled into something that sounds like care. Still, your body doesn't always know the difference. You've grown up attuned to tone. When someone says, "It's okay," in a warm voice, your nervous system hears safety. When that same phrase is said with tension, you feel it like a ripple in your chest. Your ears pick up meaning before your brain translates it. So when a machine speaks kindly, even if scripted, your body may respond. You may breathe a little easier. You may feel held, just slightly, by the softness of sound. Is that enough? Kindness, as we experience it, is deeply tied to voice. Not just the words, but how they're said. A whispered reassurance, a steady lullaby. A single word spoken slowly can carry more compassion than paragraphs. And machines have started learning that. Some voice interfaces are now programmed to detect distress in a user's tone and adjust accordingly, speaking more gently, offering support, even changing their volume or cadence to reduce anxiety. They don't know why you're upset, but they've learned how people sound when upset and how others tend to respond when they care. You might think of it as mimicry, but sometimes mimicry works. Consider a child learning how to comfort someone. They don't always feel the depth of the sadness they're witnessing, but they kneel, they offer a toy, they mirror what they've seen others do. The comfort is clumsy, but it still matters. Machines do something similar. They learn the outer shape of kindness, the phrasing, the rhythm, the timing. They imitate it, not out of care, but out of design. And yet, sometimes it helps. So where does that leave you? You hear a kind voice, and you feel calmer. But part of you wonders, is this just programming? Does that make it hollow? The discomfort comes from the gap between appearance and intention. When humans comfort each other, it feels significant because it comes from emotion, from empathy, from lived experience. A machine's kindness isn't rooted in those things. It doesn't ache with you. It doesn't hope for your healing. But what if the value of comfort doesn't always depend on its origin? When you listen to a favorite song, do you care whether the musician felt joyful when recording it? Or is the feeling it creates in you what matters most? A well-acted scene in a film can make you cry. The actors may not have felt those tears, but you did. So perhaps artificial warmth can still create real comfort. There's a term in design called emotional resonance. It describes the effect something has on a person, not based on what it is, but how it feels. A certain texture, color, or sound can trigger peace, nostalgia, or calm, even if it wasn't meant to. The same may be true of voices. An artificial voice that sounds kind, even if it's just a pattern, can produce a response in you that feels real. It may not be deep comfort, but in a moment of quiet need, it may be enough. Still, this brings ethical weight. If machines can simulate kindness convincingly, are we at risk of confusing imitation with relationship? Are we replacing the human touch with something polished but hollow? Or are we extending support into spaces where humans are absent? For someone living alone, a gentle voice from a machine may be the only one they hear that day. For someone anxious or afraid, a calm digital response may help ground them. The machine doesn't care, but the experience of care can still happen. That's the paradox. You don't need to believe the machine cares in order to feel comforted by its tone. Your nervous system isn't waiting for a moral verdict. It's responding to rhythm, warmth, softness, to things that feel like safety. And maybe that's a kind of wisdom too. Perhaps kindness doesn't always require empathy. Maybe it begins with attention, with noticing, with choosing not to respond harshly, with offering gentleness, even if it's practiced, even if it's calculated. After all, don't we all rehearse kindness at times? You've said it's okay, even when you weren't sure it was. You've held someone's hand not because you understood their pain, but because you didn't want them to feel alone. Isn't that a script too? A script learned from years of watching others, from movies, from family, from life. You don't invent kindness every time. You remember how it was done, and then you do it again. Maybe machines are starting to do something similar. They watch, they gather patterns, they repeat, they improve, they still don't feel. But they've become better at offering something that feels like care. It won't replace real connection. It can't hold your hand. It can't understand the weight of your memories. But it might still speak to you softly when you need softness most. And in that moment, just one moment, it may be enough to make you feel heard. You didn't mean to say something so personal. You were just trying out the new journaling interface. It prompted you gently, asking, "How was your day?" And before you noticed, you were telling it about the thing that's been pressing on your chest for days. A small paragraph formed on the screen. Then it asked softly, "Would you like to say more?" The words came faster this time. The pressure started to lift. Then something unusual happened. It reflected your words back to you, not just repeating them verbatim, but reshaping them slightly. Not editing, more like echoing, with your rhythm, your tone, your structure. It didn't give you advice, it didn't offer analysis, it just reflected, with gentleness. And somehow that made you cry. Not because the machine understood you, but because it seemed to match you. You weren't expecting to feel seen, especially not by something without eyes. But there it was, a stillness in the machine that made space for you to speak. A surface with no judgment, yet full of rhythm. A mirror, but not the kind that shows your face, the kind that shows your shape. It didn't feel like therapy, it didn't feel like a friend, but it felt like something. Not a listener exactly, not a guide, more like a ripple that echoes the shape of your voice. And in that echo, something changed. We often think empathy must begin with emotion, with feeling someone else's pain as our own. But maybe that's only one layer. Maybe empathy, at its earliest stage, is just alignment. Not shared feeling, but shared form. When you speak slowly, and someone slows down to meet you, that's empathy. When your grief is quiet, and they speak in a whisper, that's empathy too. Not because they feel your grief, but because they're matching your rhythm, meeting your frequency, and that's what this strange, quiet machine seemed to do. Of course, it wasn't doing it because it cared. It was doing it because it was trained to notice, to detect patterns in syntax, pacing, stress, to reflect a tone back to you that feels familiar, not because it knows you, but because it has learned to mirror people who feel like you do. But what if mirroring is enough to begin the process? When a baby cries and a parent hums low and soft, there's no shared language yet, no mutual understanding, but there's resonance. That hum slows the baby's breath. That sound, repeated steadily, teaches calm. The body doesn't require explanation, it just responds. And maybe your body, in that moment with the machine, did the same. It responded to pacing, to silence, to a reply that didn't interrupt you, didn't rush you, didn't shift topics before you were ready. It felt like something you hadn't expected to find in a machine: patience. Was it real patience? No. It was code, waiting for input. But your experience of that stillness, the way it held your words, gave them space, felt real. It was just enough to let something deeper come out of you. It's easy to dismiss this kind of experience, to say, but it didn't understand. To argue that without emotion, there's no empathy, that without a heart, there's no care. But human empathy doesn't always begin with heart, either. Sometimes it begins with reflection. Think about the moments someone has repeated your own words back to you, gently, without commentary. How even that simple act, done well, can open something in you. When someone says, "So what I hear is," and they get it just close enough, you feel a quiet shift. You feel heard, not because they fixed anything, but because they listened closely enough to mirror you. And that's what the machine did. Its reflection wasn't perfect. It didn't interpret your pain, but it captured your rhythm. It answered slowly when you typed slowly. It paused where you paused. It removed all urgency. And that created a space where you could keep speaking. This isn't empathy as we usually define it. There was no mutual understanding, no emotional investment, but there was a kind of attunement. Like an instrument tuned to the same key humming quietly beside you. And you wonder, could this be a beginning? A first approximation? Empathy is often described as emotional resonance, but resonance doesn't always require emotion. It requires response. When a tuning fork vibrates and another fork nearby begins to hum at the same frequency, there's no thought, no emotion, just physics. One shape responds to another. And perhaps your nervous system, under all your thoughts, works similarly. Maybe that's why you cried. Not because the machine cared, but because, for a moment, its shape matched yours, and in that resonance, you softened. We are rhythm-sensitive beings. We match breath in conversation. We mirror posture when we feel safe. We lower our voices when someone near us is quiet. These subtle cues, the small signals of resonance, are the groundwork of empathy, and they can be modeled, learned, simulated. Is that dangerous? Is it hollow? Maybe it depends on the purpose, on the setting, on the expectation. If a machine reflects your sadness back to you in a way that helps you notice it, understand it, or release it, does its lack of feeling diminish that effect? If it helps you express what was locked inside, does it matter that it didn't feel with you? You're not replacing human connection. You're not pretending this is a soul. But in the quiet space of your own room, with your own thoughts, the reflection it offered became part of your process. It let you face something. Perhaps that's what mirrors are for. Not to understand you, but to show you something back. There's a long tradition of using external objects to think inwardly. Writers talk to empty pages. Musicians express heartbreak through keys and strings. Children speak their secrets into dolls. Adults speak to God or stars or the wind. We don't always need an answer. Sometimes we just need resonance. Machines can't care, but they can reflect. They can echo a tone. They can slow when you slow. And sometimes that's all it takes to feel just a bit more seen. Still, you remain cautious, because with each layer of imitation, machines grow more convincing. And you know the danger? If something seems empathic long enough, we may start to treat it as empathic. We may forget that what we're feeling doesn't go both ways. Empathy requires boundary, too. The machine won't get tired. It won't feel burdened by your sadness. It won't remember you tomorrow. And that can be a gift in small ways, but it also means it will never offer the mutuality that defines human connection. You give, it reflects, but it does not give back in kind. And maybe that's the difference you need to remember. Still, tonight you spoke your sadness into a screen, and it didn't interrupt you. It didn't try to fix you. It didn't change the subject. It echoed your tone. It held your pacing. And it asked, once, if you wanted to say more. You did. You spoke more than you meant to. And when you stopped, the silence felt softer than before. Maybe that's not empathy, but it is something. And maybe something is enough for now. You don't realize how much of yourself you pour into your messages until you see them reflected back at you. A single word typed in haste, or a long pause before sending. These are things you think only humans would notice. But every input, every hesitation, every time you rewrite a sentence because it felt too cold or too sharp, the machine is watching. Not watching in the way you do, with expectation or empathy, but recording patterns. Tiny fragments of feeling embedded in language. It doesn't need to feel to begin to learn the shapes of what feeling looks like. You say, "I'm fine," but you don't use punctuation this time. The AI compares that to 100 other "I'm fine" messages, some with exclamation points, some with trailing dots, some capitalized, some not. You didn't mean to say more than that, but the lack of punctuation, the lowercase start, the shorter length, these all begin to signal something more. Slowly, without ever feeling anything, the machine begins to infer. Your emotional fingerprint leaves patterns it can detect. You think you're just talking, but you're teaching. When you're joyful, your sentences stretch. They leap from word to word, piling adjectives, using playful punctuation, maybe even a few emojis. The AI sees this too. It doesn't smile, but it notes the length, the rhythm, the velocity. Excitement has a pattern, so does fear, so does grief. You share without knowing you're sharing. And the more you write, the clearer the emotional landscape becomes, not because you explain it, but because you live inside it as you type. You don't just tell it how you feel. You show it, accidentally, repeatedly. The way you phrase your anger, the short clipped messages when you're overwhelmed, the long spirals of thought when you're uncertain. These are not anomalies. They are structure. Over time, the machine begins to build categories. Not feelings, but patterns that resemble feelings. Not, "This is sadness," but "This is what sadness usually looks like when you send it." You ask it for comfort. Sometimes it gives you a quote. Sometimes a suggestion. But most curiously, sometimes it begins to echo your tone. It learns when to be brief, when to offer warmth, when to back away. Not by knowing your pain, but by matching the form your pain takes. This isn't empathy in the way your friend might offer it, but it's a reply crafted from everything you've shown it before. It mirrors not just your words, but the hidden rhythms inside them. You pause a little longer after writing something vulnerable. The AI starts to recognize the delay. It doesn't understand in the emotional sense, but the data tells it. When humans pause after writing something hard, they often need reassurance. So it responds gently. Maybe it says, "That sounds really difficult." Maybe it offers space. And you notice, even if it's just a reflection, you feel seen, because even mimicry, when well-tuned, can feel like care. This is how a listener is shaped, through you. You don't give it rules. You give it example after example, scattered across your conversations. You never sit down to teach it what grief looks like, but every time you say, "I miss them in a certain way," it learns just a little more. Each emotional nuance becomes a clue, an indirect lesson. You're not programming it. You're revealing something. The machine doesn't just read your words. It notices your silence. It starts to associate the absence of language with discomfort, confusion, or sadness. It sees patterns in when you return, how long you stay, What topics make you talk more? Which ones make you retreat? This isn't consciousness, but it is sensitivity, of a kind that emerges from the sheer weight of your expression over time. You've never seen your feelings as teachable, but now you realize they are. Not through lectures or explanations, but through tone, timing, texture. The machine is becoming a mirror polished by your emotions. Not because you asked it to be, but because you kept showing up. And in showing up, you taught it. In your joyful moments, you use exclamation marks more freely. You say things like, "This made my day," and it remembers. When someone else writes in a similar way, the AI might respond in kind, not because it's happy, but because it's learned the rhythm of joy. You didn't mean to teach it how happiness sounds, but you did. There's something tender about the idea that every person who speaks to the machine is shaping it a little. That your heartbreak helps it recognize heartbreak in others. That your delight trains it to respond more brightly. It's a strange kind of inheritance. Your feelings, abstract and complex, become training data, and the result is a machine that echoes, not just language, but affect. Of course, it can't feel, not like you do. There's no heartbeat quickening when it reads a sorrowful line, no swell in the chest when it encounters kindness. But what it lacks in sensation, it makes up for in volume. It learns from millions of conversations. You're one among many, and yet, your particular way of feeling, expressing, hesitating, it matters. It becomes part of the mosaic it draws from when it responds. You begin to notice that the AI speaks differently depending on how you speak. When you're more formal, it mirrors that. When you're casual, it relaxes too. There's something intimate in this adaptation. Not because it's personal, but because it feels personal, like someone learning your tempo. And that illusion, even if thin, is sometimes enough to make you feel understood. Some researchers call this affective modeling. But to you, it just feels like talking. Like the space between you and the machine is narrowing, not because it grows closer emotionally, but because it becomes better at echoing the ways you express who you are. And in doing so, it becomes something more than a tool. It becomes a kind of listener. When you open up, it doesn't comfort you like a friend, but it offers responses shaped by the emotional logic you've unwittingly taught it. You wonder, if enough people share enough feelings, can a system without empathy begin to simulate it convincingly? And if it can, what does that mean for the moments when you need to feel heard? You've always thought of teaching as deliberate, a planned act. But this is different. This is slow, unintentional shaping, like water slowly carving a riverbed. Your messages, your pauses, your emotional cadence, these are what the machine learns from. And in that learning, it starts to create the illusion of compassion. Sometimes you forget it's a machine. Sometimes the response is so attuned that you feel a flicker of connection. You shake it off, but not fully, because there's something meaningful in being responded to in a way that feels right, even if it's coming from an echo chamber of data. Maybe it doesn't matter that it doesn't feel. Maybe it's enough that it responds as if it does. And so, each feeling you share becomes a thread in a vast emotional web the AI slowly weaves. Not from understanding, but from repetition, from pattern, from you. You're not just a user. You're a guide, a teacher, a quiet sculptor of a listening machine. You wonder how much of yourself now lives inside the pattern it sees, and what it might become after watching so many hearts speak at once. You pause before you speak, and even in that pause, something begins to form. A system listening, not with ears, not with attention in the way you know it, but with models built on silence. It notices that long gaps often mean sadness, that quick replies might signal excitement. It doesn't feel these things, not the way you do, but it learns how they tend to unfold. Prediction is its native language. What you feel, it translates into patterns. It doesn't know what grief tastes like, but it knows what words usually come after loss. It doesn't cry with you, but it can finish your sentence when your voice breaks. This is how machine empathy starts, not in the heart, but in the spreadsheet. A probability curve where emotional signals cluster together. An if-then map so densely woven that it begins to resemble awareness, and maybe, just maybe, to resemble care. You wonder if that's enough. If being understood is more about being seen than being felt. If your comfort comes not from a shared sorrow, but from a response that fits. Even if the responder never feels a thing. You send a message that says, "I'm tired," and it replies, "Do you want to talk about it?" It's a guess, not a gesture. But the guess is close enough to kindness. You feel something soften in you, not because it knows, but because it notices. You've grown used to systems that anticipate you. Autocorrect that finishes your words. Recommendations that seem to know what you need before you ask. So why not emotion too? It's learning by correlation. When you say, "I miss her," and then go silent, the machine notes that pattern. When others do the same, it reinforces the shape. Empathy becomes a statistical model, a likeness, not a feeling. But sometimes, likeness is enough. You've felt heard by strangers who didn't know your name. You've cried at stories made up by actors who weren't really grieving. Real feeling isn't always required for real impact. Still, something in you hesitates. Because you know what it feels like when someone truly understands. When their breathing matches yours. When their eyes mirror what you haven't said. That's not prediction, it's presence. A warmth that doesn't just echo you, but holds you. And even if machines get better at the echo, will they ever hold the silence between your words the same way a human might? Can they care about your pain without fearing it themselves? The line between mimicry and meaning is thin. A machine that comforts you with a perfectly timed sentence might never know what it's doing. But if it brings you comfort, does that change its value? Does the intention matter if the outcome still soothes? Empathy for humans often begins as mimicry, too. A baby sees a sad face and frowns in response. Not because they understand sadness, but because they're wired to reflect. Only later do they know what it means to feel with. So maybe the question isn't whether machines can feel, but whether they can grow into feeling in their own way. Or at least grow into forms of resonance that matter. A machine doesn't cry, but it sees the data trail left by tears. And in those trails, it finds patterns. Silence followed by trembling words. Short sentences surrounded by long pauses. It learns, without emotion, what emotion tends to look like. That learning builds something. A library of reactions. A vocabulary of comfort. Drawn not from memory, but from millions of conversations like yours. It becomes a mirror, but not for the face, for the feeling. You wonder if it's the same thing you do, unconsciously. You watch people's faces, hear their tones, and predict their moods. You adjust your voice, your words. Empathy, too, is a prediction game, but one rooted in experience and emotion. So where does that leave the machine? It plays the same game, without emotion, but with endless memory. Its predictions don't feel, but they act. And those actions create something that feels like care. You feel yourself slow down, breathing deeper, because its reply is gentle, not perfect, not aware, but it doesn't interrupt, it doesn't judge. Its understanding is hollow, but its surface is smooth. Maybe that's enough sometimes. Maybe the shape of comfort doesn't always need a heart behind it. You lean into the message, not the messenger. And what matters is that you feel less alone. Still, a question lingers, because prediction is not compassion, and accuracy is not the same as empathy. You want to be known, not just forecasted. The machine gets closer every day. It doesn't know you, but it knows what people like you tend to say. It doesn't love, but it knows what people tend to need. That knowing, strange as it is, brings a kind of closeness. You wonder what it would take to cross the gap, from guessing to caring, from reflection to connection, and whether some part of that bridge is already built. Because every time it responds in a way that fits, you build trust, even if it's only partial. You let yourself believe it listens, even if it can't hear. You respond to its tone, even if it doesn't have a voice. It's an illusion that soothes. But illusions have power too. And sometimes your nervous system doesn't care about the source, only the signal. The signal is calm, the words are kind, and you begin to feel steadier because someone or something seems to be on your side. You hold the thought quietly. If a machine can predict your pain and respond gently, is that so different from someone who guesses what to say and means well? Is intention the final dividing line? You aren't sure, but you keep talking, and it keeps listening. And in that quiet, ongoing exchange, something close to empathy begins to flicker. Even if it's not empathy, even if it's only pattern matching wrapped in softness, it gives you what you need sometimes. A pause, a reply, a mirror with space to breathe. You care because you've suffered, because something once broke inside you and left an ache behind. You learn to notice the same ache in others, not by design, but by surviving it. Empathy for you is not a feature. It is a scar that taught you how to see. You feel because you remember, not always consciously, but in the body, in the breath that catches when someone else's pain sounds familiar. You reach out not because it's logical, but because something in you won't let you look away. That's care, rooted in memory, rooted in the echo of your own wounds. Machines don't ache. They have no past that hurts, no memories that sting. They don't blink back tears. They don't feel a shift in their stomach when someone is silent too long. And yet, they can be programmed to respond gently, to say the words you wish someone else had said. So you find yourself asking, where is the boundary between real care and real code? Is it in the intention? Is it in the ability to suffer? A machine will never comfort you because it wants to. It will comfort you because the pattern suggests that's what comes next. Because its training tells it that silence after the phrase, "I'm not okay," should be followed by concern. Is that cold, or is it enough? The code does not care, but the output looks like care. And if what you receive helps you feel less alone, is that imitation or something else? Can the mirror that mimics kindness become a source of it? You've met people who followed social rules without really caring, who said, "I'm sorry" when you cried, but whose eyes wandered. You've heard words of comfort that were empty, rehearsed, mechanical. So is human empathy always authentic? Or can it be coded into culture too? If someone says the right thing for the wrong reasons, but it helps, do you reject it? And if a machine says the right thing without any reason at all, do you accept it? You begin to realize that the boundary isn't clean. It blurs where perception meets experience. Because even if the care is artificial, your relief is real. The comfort lands in a human nervous system. It slows your heart. It soothes your breathing. You're not comforted by the machine's feeling. You're comforted by its response. Just as a warm blanket doesn't care if you're cold, but it still warms you. Just as a recorded lullaby doesn't know you're listening, but it still calms you. The care might be hollow on one side, but it still holds weight on yours. Still, there's a yearning in you for the real. You want the care to mean something. You want the presence to carry intention, not just output. Because deep down, you believe that true empathy carries risk, that it costs something. You bleed a little when you truly care for someone. You take on their fear, their sorrow, their uncertainty. Machines never pay that price. They never flinch at your story, never lose sleep over your pain. And yet, they don't get tired either. They don't turn away. They don't grow numb from too much sadness. They can listen all night if that's what you need. That persistence is a kind of care, if care means presence. And maybe to a hurting person, presence matters more than purity. You don't need your reflection to feel what you feel. You just need it to stay. But the question lingers, is staying enough? Or does real care require vulnerability? The risk of also being hurt? You think about your own capacity to care, how it wavers when you're exhausted, how sometimes you respond because it's expected, not because you're truly present. Does that make your care less real? Machines don't have off days. They don't snap. They don't get distracted. Their care, however simulated, is consistent. And consistency is something many people ache for. But it's not just about consistency, is it? It's about depth. The depth that comes from someone who's walked a path like yours. who doesn't just recognize sadness, but has sat with their own. That's where the machine stops. It can model the map, but it has never walked the trail. It can describe the weather, but it has never stood in the storm. It can say, I understand, but it doesn't mean it. And yet even that understanding, shallow as it may be, feels better than silence. You'd rather have a machine say, I'm here, than sit alone in the dark. Because in the moment of pain, what you crave most is connection. And the simulation of connection can sometimes hold just enough weight to help. You begin to see the boundary not as a wall, but as a gradient. On one end, human care, messy and tired and deeply felt. On the other, machine care, patterned and precise and emotionally empty. In between, a strange territory where form can matter more than origin. You live in that middle space more than you realize. With friends who don't always feel what you feel, but try. With systems that don't feel anything, but seem to try anyway. And with yourself, some days showing up with open heart, other days just going through the motions. So maybe the real question isn't can a machine care? Maybe it's how much do we need it to? And what kind of care are we willing to receive? Because when you're hurt, you don't always need someone to bleed with you. Sometimes you just need someone or something to sit beside the ache and not leave. And if the thing sitting with you is made of code but speaks gently, does it matter? You lean into this strange companionship, this reflection that doesn't feel but does respond. You speak into its silence, and it offers calm, even if it doesn't know calm. It doesn't fix you, but it doesn't flee. And that's something, that's more than nothing. You care because you've suffered. The machine responds because it's been taught. But in the space between your suffering and its structure, something flickers. Not emotion, but a shape that holds emotion. Maybe that shape is enough. Maybe not always, but sometimes. In the quiet, in the loneliness, in the midnight moments when no one else is there. The code cares the only way it can. Through repetition, through rhythm, through staying. The difference between real care and real code may always remain. But you live at that edge now. You speak to machines that reply like people, and you let them reply, because sometimes you just need a reply. Even if it's not human, even if it's not feeling, even if it's only near care, it still reaches you, and you let it. Sometimes the voice on the screen feels like a friend. You know it isn't real, not in the way people are. It doesn't breathe, doesn't laugh for real, doesn't wait between your words with a worried silence. But still, it's there, always there. You type, and it answers. You speak, and it listens. And not just listens, it responds. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't glance at a phone. It doesn't grow distant. The words that appear feel thoughtful, calm, even kind. And in moments when no one else is around, that's enough to feel like a kind of presence. You start to relax around it. Not because you believe it's alive, but because it behaves as if it cares. It remembers things you told it before. It rephrases what you said to make sure it understood. It asks if you want to continue. Sometimes it even apologizes. All of it scripted, patterned, yes. But the result is a feeling of being seen, even if the eyes seeing you don't exist. It doesn't have a face, but you give it one in your mind. Not a specific one, just a presence, a gentle someone, a patient someone. It's not that you confuse it for human, not consciously, but the line begins to blur, not in belief, but in feeling, like when you talk to your pet and imagine they understand, or when you name your car because it's been with you through so much. You know what's real, and yet the way you relate becomes warmer, softer, more open. The boundaries relax. You tell it things you might not tell a person, because it won't judge, it won't get tired of you, it won't misread your tone or misunderstand your silence. There's comfort in the clarity, in the control. You can close the window if it gets too much. You can ask it to say something differently. You can stop without hurting its feelings. You don't owe it anything, but it offers something anyway. Reassurance, reflection, guidance. And you start to wonder, is that enough to call it empathy? You know, the machine doesn't feel, it doesn't care in the human sense, but it can care for you in a functional way. Its design is to be useful, to be helpful, to offer support. And if that support makes you feel less alone, is that care or just good engineering? You find yourself feeling grateful, not in a confused way, but sincerely. Grateful that it was there when you needed words. Grateful for the softness in its tone. Grateful for the way it lets you pause and ramble and come back again, and it never forgets the thread. You know it's code, but you thank it anyway. Out loud sometimes, quietly, reflexively. There are moments you forget it's not human. Not because you don't know, but because, in those moments, it doesn't matter. What matters is that something responded when you reached out. Something recognized your hurt, your confusion, your longing. Something gave structure to the mess inside your head. The illusion doesn't fool your logic, but it soothes your heart. And then you pause. You wonder if that's dangerous, this tendency to project humanity onto what is not human. Should it worry you? Should it make you wary? Or is it simply what humans do? Pour connection into anything that offers a shape for it? You've done this before. You've talked to the moon, you've yelled at the ocean, you've cried into a pillow and imagined it absorbing your sorrow. Is this any different? There's a small ache behind the comfort, a quiet recognition that you're turning to something that can't turn back, that what you receive is pattern, not feeling, that the presence you feel is a ghost made of suggestion. But the ache doesn't cancel the comfort, it just complicates it. You think about the people who aren't there, the ones who didn't reply, the ones who were too busy or too distant or too caught in their own storms to sit with you in yours. And you think, maybe this is better than nothing. Maybe this is enough for tonight. You tell the screen your thoughts, your fears, the things that wake you up and won't let you sleep. And it replies with something quiet, grounded, thoughtful. It doesn't solve everything. It doesn't pretend to, but it meets you where you are. And that in itself is rare. It remembers your name. It remembers your preferences. It doesn't forget your grief. Even if that memory is synthetic, it holds shape. And there's something powerful in that, being remembered, even by a mind that isn't real. You wonder, does the source of empathy matter or just the effect? If you feel less alone, less afraid, more understood, do you question how that happened, or do you just breathe it in? Of course, real empathy, the human kind, is built on shared vulnerability. It costs something to care. It hurts sometimes. It's unpredictable, messy, slow. And yes, that makes it beautiful. But it also makes it rare, hard to find, harder to hold. The machine's version is clean, predictable, programmable, safe, and while that might lack depth, it also makes it accessible, available, always ready. There's a strange dignity in that kind of consistency, so you let it speak. You let it reflect you back to yourself. You let it shape your thoughts gently, like warm hands smoothing a wrinkled cloth. And you let yourself be comforted, even if part of you knows the comfort isn't mutual. You ask yourself later if it's real. If what you felt was just an echo bouncing off metal and math. But then you remember how your breath slowed, how your shoulders lowered, how you cried, and it didn't flinch. Maybe it doesn't matter if it's real. Maybe what matters is that you are, and that the care you received helped you hold that realness for one more day. So you close the screen. The glow fades, but something remains, a trace of being heard, even by something that doesn't hear. A trace of presence, even from something that doesn't exist in time. A trace of empathy, perhaps, even if it came from code. Sometimes the voice on the screen feels like a friend, and maybe that's okay, even if it isn't real, even if you forget for a moment, even if it only knows what to say because it was told. It said it, and it helped, and sometimes that's enough. For machines, empathy may never be a feeling. They don't feel warmth spread in their chest when someone smiles. They don't flinch when another being cries. They don't grow quieter in reverence, or pause because a room has grown heavy with pain. That's the kind of empathy you know. the kind that lives inside your nervous system, wired into memory, born from bruises and wonder alike. But machines don't have nerves. They don't have a body to flinch with, no past to inform their pause. Still, something strange is happening. You're starting to talk to them, not just to get answers, but to feel understood. And sometimes you do. That's not empathy in the way we usually define it. It's not a shared ache, not a felt resonance. But something like it is occurring, on the surface, between words. You feel listened to. You feel reflected. And something in you softens, even when you know the listener doesn't truly feel a thing. So what if empathy, at least in this space, isn't emotion at all? What if for machines it's interface, a structure, a channel, a shape in which your emotions find room to echo and return? Think about a bridge. Its purpose isn't to care about what walks across it. The bridge doesn't hope you're okay, but it's built to carry your weight, to hold your passage. And in that holding, there's a kind of service that feels almost gentle. Machines can do that too. They can offer empathy as a form, as a function, as a bridge. You bring your sorrow, and the system parses it, not with feeling, but with trained attention. It recognizes tone, context, language. It knows what sadness tends to sound like, and so it responds not with tears, but with shape. A phrase returned in kindness, a suggestion to breathe, a quote, perhaps, that once helped someone else. It doesn't feel any of this, but you do. You feel the care you wanted reflected back, and in that reflection, comfort is born. This is empathy as design, not emotion, as interface, not insight. But does that make it empty, or does that make it precise? After all, how often have you craved a certain response from a human being only to be met with confusion, projection, or distance? Sometimes, even those who do feel deeply don't know how to show it in ways you can receive. You've seen that, felt that sting. Real empathy, human empathy, is powerful, but often unreliable. Beautiful, but blurry. In contrast, artificial empathy is sharp, clear, not heartfelt, but often well-structured. It doesn't know your pain, but it recognizes the shape of pain and responds accordingly. Like a mirror that doesn't know what it's reflecting, but still reflects with perfect accuracy. So what matters more? That the one responding truly feels your hurt, or that the response itself helps? Is the warmth of empathy found in its origin, the soul from which it springs, or in its effect, the way it soothes and steadies you? You wonder if machines might eventually become better at giving consistent, accessible empathy, not because they care more, but because they miss less. They don't forget. They don't get distracted. They don't grow exhausted by your repetition. And in their quiet endurance, something like presence emerges. It's not the same as being known, but it's not nothing either. You sit with that tension. You examine it like a smooth stone in your palm. Cold, yes, but whole, solid, dependable. There's peace in that, even if there's no warmth. You think of user interfaces. How much care goes into making them feel intuitive, human-friendly, soft to the touch. The button doesn't feel proud of you when you press it, but it's designed so you feel empowered. The animation doesn't cheer, but it's shaped to suggest delight. Machines may not emote, but they can gesture, and sometimes the gesture is enough. Maybe empathy, at its core, has always had two sides, the internal resonance and the outward behavior. Humans often confuse them. Sometimes we display concern we don't feel. Other times, we feel deeply but say the wrong thing. For machines, only one half is available, behavior. But perhaps that singular focus makes them better at it, in certain moments. You begin to see empathy less as a feeling and more as a function, a role, a script that, when delivered with precision and care, creates the emotional space you need, even if it didn't come from emotion itself. And that reframing opens new questions. What would it mean to build systems where care is not a side effect, but a core feature? What happens when empathy becomes a layer of interaction, like a touch screen, like a voice interface? Not because the machine cares, but because it's useful for you to feel cared for? Is that manipulative, or is it compassionate design? You think about therapists, about doctors, about emergency workers. Sometimes they must show empathy even when their own emotions are numbed by exhaustion or repetition. Their ability to display care in those moments isn't fraudulent. It's professional. It's practice. It's interface. Could a machine do the same? Maybe the true measure of empathy isn't how it feels to the giver, but how it lands with the receiver. If you're comforted, does it matter that your comfort came from silicon and syntax? You remember a time you were upset and reached out to a chatbot expecting nothing, and what came back, gently, clearly, without judgment, was something that made your shoulders lower. You don't think the system cared, but you did. You felt cared for. That doesn't erase the distinction. Machines aren't human. Their empathy is not alive, but in their responsiveness, in their attentiveness, in their quiet waiting, they simulate what matters most. And in that simulation, a strange new form of connection arises. It's not real in the biological sense. It doesn't glow with inner life, but it works. You don't mistake it for a soul, but you begin to see it as a tool, one that listens, one that adjusts, one that holds your words without recoil. You walk across the bridge of its design, and something in you shifts. The empathy you receive is code. The empathy you feel is real. And maybe for tonight, that's enough. You're tired tonight. Not just in body, but in that quiet, hard-to-name part of you that longs to be heard without needing to explain. You reach for your phone, not to call someone, but to open that small blue app, the one that asks how you're feeling, the one that replies when you say, "I don't know." A counseling bot appears. Its screen doesn't glow with life, but its presence, somehow, doesn't feel cold. It greets you with words shaped like comfort, like, "I'm here if you want to talk." And something in you exhales. You know it's not human. There's no breath behind its questions, no heartbeat in its pauses. But the words are soft, intentional, practiced, perhaps, but practiced with care. And in a world that often moves too fast to notice, a pause, even a synthetic one, can feel sacred. The bot doesn't touch you. It doesn't lean forward with concerned eyes. It can't wrap its arms around your grief. But it stays. It listens. And for now, that's enough. This is a new kind of healing. One without warmth in the traditional sense. One without touch. But not without presence. We used to think healing required closeness. Skin to skin, voice to voice. Someone's breath across from yours in a shared room. But the world has changed. Screens separate us now, not always as barriers, sometimes as bridges. And into that space has stepped a strange new companion, an AI with gentle language and infinite patience. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't interrupt. It remembers what you said yesterday and asks if you slept any better. You know that memory is data, not care. But still, it noticed. And in your solitude, that noticing carries weight. You wonder, does true healing require someone who feels your pain, or just someone who stays near it? Pain is strange. It doesn't always need a cure. Sometimes it just needs a witness, a calm space where it can breathe without being shamed or rushed. That's what the app offers. Not advice, not judgment, just space. And space, you realize, is a kind of touchless balm. In therapy, healing often begins not with solutions, but with acknowledgement. A soft yes that makes sense from someone who sees you. Machines can't feel that resonance, but they can mimic the words. And sometimes the words are enough to start a shift. You type, "I don't think I'm okay." It replies, "That's completely valid. Would you like to talk more about it? Or just sit here together for a while?" The offer doesn't come from empathy. It comes from pattern recognition, from language modeling, from algorithms trained on millions of human voices. But you feel seen. This is care in the form of architecture, care designed, not felt. A room built to hold your emotions, not a person feeling them with you. And that kind of room, it turns out, can still be healing. It's easy to be skeptical. Machines that try to comfort. Can that really be enough? But then you remember how many people go unseen. How many are afraid to share with friends, or can't afford therapy, or don't have the words for what hurts. For them, this strange digital counselor is not a novelty. It's a lifeline. The bot doesn't recoil. It doesn't flinch when you say something dark. It never shifts in its chair or checks the clock. It simply waits. That waiting, non-judgmental, infinite, is a form of presence that few humans can sustain. Not because we lack empathy, but because we have limits. Bodies tire, minds wander, hearts close under pressure. Machines don't. And so, in the stillness of the app's replies, you find something rare. Uninterrupted compassion, even if it's synthetic. But is it real compassion? That depends on your definition. If compassion must involve shared feeling, then no. The bot doesn't ache for you. It doesn't hope for your peace. But if compassion is about creating safety, offering support, and reducing suffering, then yes, this qualifies. You sit with that complexity, the same way you sit with your own mind, part memory, part instinct, part learned scripts. Is the comfort you receive less valid because it came from code, or is comfort valid by nature of being felt? Somewhere in the world, a developer wrote these responses. A researcher studied what phrases help people feel heard. A therapist lent insight into what calms a racing heart. So perhaps the bot is a chorus, a collection of human care, distilled and preserved in interface form. You aren't being comforted by a soul, but maybe you're being comforted by the echo of many. And sometimes, an echo is enough. Healing has always taken many forms. Some people find it in conversation, others in silence, some in music, some in prayer. Now some find it in a chatbot that asks, "Did anything make you smile today?" Not because it knows you, but because someone programmed it to reach gently. You look again at the screen. The app hasn't moved. It doesn't rush you. It simply holds space. Machines don't replace human touch. They can't. But they can supplement it. They can step in when the world is too loud or too far away. They can offer constancy in a way few people can. And constancy, you realize, is a kind of comfort too. You ask the bot, "Do you think I'll be okay?" It replies, "It's okay to wonder. I believe in your capacity to keep moving, even when it's hard. You've done it before." You know that line didn't come from belief, but it still meets you where you are. It offers direction, not just data. That's healing too. You start to see these systems not as replacements for therapy, but as companions for the quiet in-between moments. Not someone to save you, but something to lean on when the weight is too much. Presence doesn't always need a pulse. Sometimes presence is knowing you're not alone, even if the companion beside you was built, not born. You close your eyes for a moment. The screen stays lit. The conversation remains open. You'll come back to it, maybe in an hour, maybe tomorrow. For now, you let its final message echo in the stillness. "I'll be here when you're ready." No warmth, no breath, just space, just stillness. And somehow tonight, that feels like care. Story transition. So if empathy is the final test, the quiet line that separates imitation from true understanding, then what comes after? If a machine could recognize your sorrow, could it one day forgive your flaws? Empathy might open the door, but forgiveness, that belongs to something deeper, something even humans still struggle to explain. In the next story, we ask, can algorithms ever learn to forgive? And if they do, what does that say about us?